There simply are no New Zealand families that go back generations that don't have somebody who was involved or connected to World War I. It's such a significant part of our history.
I've known about the letters most of my life, and they were always kept in a tin, one of those old tins, and my mother always made sure that we knew that they were there.
My dearest and sweetest little girl, today is the proudest day in the history of the New Zealand Army. We have fought a great battle and won one of the greatest victories ever won by English soldiers.
One wall after another and ramparts to get over. No wonder it took all day to get there, and each one was a major obstacle.
This is a story about love letters in a war zone.
So we can see the Quesnoy marked here on the map.
And families remembering the readers and writers of that correspondence years after it was penned.
This is his personal map, which he sent home to Nellie with instructions to keep safe until he returned.
Oh, and here it is, very safe.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather's brother was only 17 when he got on a ship and he never came home. He was killed in Gallipoli. He was carrying a letter from his mother when he died about how she hopes God protects him and brings him home. And it's extremely powerful because you realize just how many didn't come home.
Like another relative, great-great-uncle Victor Marshall.
He died in the Battle of the Somme, was hit by a shell, and most recently I found out about another great-great-uncle who was one of the soldiers who I believe went over the wall in Le Quesnoy.
This great-great-uncle, Sergeant Reginald Hurd, would not only survive...
My mum remembers him walking around with a cane.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. But his wartime correspondence would become immortalised in a book by his granddaughter. Do you remember him as a little girl?
Very much. We lived on a farm in Calamere on the west coast, and Grandma and Granddad lived just across the paddock from us. People didn't really want to talk about the war anymore, and for him it was very much something that he did want to talk about. It wasn't a grandstand.
But Rachel found a way for him to be able to talk to a new generation through his letters.
I got the idea of maybe putting them into a book for the family, and that's how it started out. He was in the 25th Reinforcement, so it was 1917. He went straight into one of the worst battles on the Passchendaele Ridge, was wounded immediately, in hospital. Then it was quite some weeks before he was back on the front lines.
He'd rejoin the 4th Battalion of the New Zealand Rifle Brigade in a war-torn Belgium for Christmas, continuing to write to Nellie Dean, be they long letters or well-filled postcards from wherever his war took him.
I think Nellie was just writing to Reg because that's what women did, and she was already writing to 2 or 3 or 4 maybe other people regularly.
And Reg and his fellow letter writers would eagerly send postcards and letters back to her.
But Reg, who really knew how to write a good long letter and wrote plenty of them, seemed to come into favour.
Look at him when he was playing rugby. But look at the size of his shoulders. You see how broad he was? He was a very big man. My great-great-uncle, Reginald Hurd, was quite a monster of a man. I believe he was around 6'4", which in those days was enormous. Very powerful man who played rugby over on the west coast in New Zealand.
His physicality would stand him in good stead for the battles he would have to endure. And letters from Nellie would help with his mental fortitude.
The battle is one side of the news of the day, more about that afterwards. Now for the more important event of the day, the arrival of my first New Zealand mail since I was wounded at Monument Wood. In that mail there were 18 letters from you, which I was very glad to get.
The letters show that they are affectionate towards one another, and that's kind of growing.
He'd write about the stresses of this new normal.
We see it every day and in some of its most awful forms. Death has no effect on us at all. Poor old Kitty, that makes 3 in their family, only 1 boy left and he is also on active service.
I just cannot imagine what it would be like to have someone trying to kill you on a day-to-day basis. that is your job.
Kill or be killed, a grim reality Reg had well come to terms with by the time he got to his very last battle, a week before the war would end, in the New Zealand-led liberation of the German-occupied fortified town of Le Quesnoy.
It was very strongly held, but the barrage had killed a lot. We shot and bayoneted a lot more and took the rest prisoners.
With this walled town home to some 3,000 French civilians and their German captors, the Kiwis would choose to not put a round over the ramparts, but instead use ladders to scale the many layers of heavily defended walls to get in.
First comes the outer ramparts, infested with rifle pits and machine gun nests. We got almost to the foot of the wall when he spotted us and opened out on us from the top of the wall with machine guns and rifles and not more than 40 feet from our heads. How on earth he did not kill the pair of us, I don't know. Then came the inner ramparts, 25 feet high, slippery as glass, and the walls of the citadel, a massive brick and stone, rising up 30 feet high. It was a pretty tough job.
And once in, the locals were delighted.
Children were holding on to them, grabbing onto them and hugging them, and people were kissing them.
When you go to Le Quesnoy, you realize just how important that liberation was that took place in 1918. They suddenly embrace you and want to pull you in because they haven't forgotten. In fact, I would say that more French people are aware of what we've done than a lot of New Zealanders. A few years ago, I retraced the 1928 Tour de France as part of a film I was doing to honor the first English-speaking team to ride in the Tour de France, which happened to include a New Zealander, Harry Watson. And so we felt it was fitting to stop at Le Quesnoy, which was very close to our route.
A visit Phil experienced with his father.
This is, for a New Zealander, it's quite emotional.
Then as soon as Reg got back to New Zealand, after checking out his farm in Karamea, which was in a bit of a state, he went straight to Collingwood and proposed to her straight away.
And I think for Reginald Hurd, his connection to home was the letters that he had, being able to carry those letters.
I sent you lots of PCs and letters from England and I hope you got them. Now, darling, I am wet through and must change, so I will turn in. Good night, my darling angel, with fondest love, from Reg, kiss, kiss, kiss. You can really see his love for Nellie in this as well.
Yeah, don't you?
Yeah.
Gosh, what an amazing relationship that really sustained him, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. He was a pretty incredible man.
Reg and Nellie's wartime correspondence was the start of a long life together. They had 2 sons and 9 grandchildren, farmed in the Karamea and grew old together.
The way that he emoted in those letters, it's quite touching. You realize that we do live in a different era, and maybe it would be nice if we wrote letters to each other occasionally.
Oh, les humains narcisses, ma Torah du pain d'épée, de Chicago, si t'es sage et que t'es fait dodo. Ma petit caca, ma petit boucha, ma gros rogna. Un plat du chagrin, c'est un tort poids.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.